Okay, welcome back. So we're going to continue on this theme of expansion and sectional crisis, which is actually the result of expansion in many cases. We're going to look at the case of Texas and the Mexican-American War. So Anglo-American settlers were actually invited to stay in Texas, or what was then known as Tejas, in the early part of the 19th century, as Spain had a great difficulty getting their subjects and their settlers, basically Mexicans, as well as Spanish folks coming from the peninsula, to come to New Spain and settle in the province of Texas. So that decided they were Anglos who wanted to come. They basically came, said they would become Catholic, they would adapt Spanish as their language, and they also brought enslaved Africans with them. Now, this isn't necessarily technically against Spanish imperial law, but at this time, Spain and later on Mexico, when they get their independence, they're both kind of their policies, especially Mexico's policies, are going to be about transitioning away from slavery. So this is going to cause quite a bit of conflict actually between the Anglo-Americans and the and Mexico later on. Now again, these Anglos, such as Stephen Austin is probably the most famous of them, and his father, they're coming by with hundreds of families by the thousands into Texas. A lot of their motivation is that they want to expand slavery west, all the way across the country. They don't have all of that territory yet, but they're expansionists. They envision a day when, New Spain, right, in North America anyway, will be the United States, right, a coast-to-coast republic. And this is going to lead to a lot of conflict among other issues. Slavery is a big issue. This is what's going to lead to the 1835 revolt, right? Where Texans, basically Anglo-Americans, allied with some Tejanos who actually are they're from Mexico, right? They're going to rebel against Mexican rule. Again, part of what Mexico was trying to do was trying to get the Anglo-Americans to basically follow Mexican law. Part of that, right, was limiting slavery as an institution. For example, Mexico, by this time, Mexico has their independence, right? They're establishing various laws such as any children born after a certain year of enslaved people will not be enslaved. And this was going on all over the Americas other than the United States. But in 1836, the Anglo-Americans they win, and they basically what they do is they declare their independence as an independent state, but they do want to be annexed. And by 1845, they are going to be actually annexed and made part of the United States of America. And again, it's no coincidence that in 1845, John O'Sullivan talks about this idea of manifest destiny, and it was in a periodical called the Democratic Review, celebrating Texas annexation, but also talking about, as he puts it, quote, the right of our manifest destiny to overspread and possess the whole continent, which Providence has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty and federated self-government, unquote. So basically, Manifest Destiny kind of declares land for Anglo-Americans, sees the indigenous people as a problem to be removed. African Americans and other people outside of this rather, limited demographic are exempt from this notion of, quote, free land, unquote. And that free land was kind of defined as any land where European people of European descent or white people had not settled. So all this land, again, this is still from Texas all the way to California. This means Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, etc. This is all still, part of Mexico, but John O'Sullivan and others, especially Southerners who want to see slavery spread to the West Coast, they see the future is to take this territory. This is a very providentially driven, it's kind of an almost religious, spiritual movement. It kind of definitely continued the racializing of American identity as white Anglo-Americans, right? And as them as the most civilized and most righteous of races, kind of the default human beings. And this picture kind of says it all. You have this Valkyrie type figure with fair hair and white skin floating across the prairie heading west. Behind her is light, in front of her is darkness, and you see the indigenous people fleeing and all this sort of thing. Very racialized vision. So the Mexican-American War, which is from 1846 to 1848, is all about westward expansion, right? You know, the treaty, it's the United States are gonna prevail. Again, manifest destiny is very much at the basis of what's going on here. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1840 is going to feed this huge swath of northern Mexico to the United States for $15 million. And this includes California, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. President Polk, North Carolinian, lived in Tennessee most of his life, a slave owner, had been a governor and Speaker of the House. Like most Southerners, right? He saw the acquisition, right, of new territories as an opportunity for expansion of slavery and an opportunity to strengthen the slaveholding elite, right? He wanted Texas annexation. He also wanted the Oregon Territory, which we'll talk about as well. Linking both was a good campaign strategy because the North favored getting Oregon, the South favored Texas, and of course, northern Mexico. Texas annexation had set the stage for conflict, right? He actually, and the question is, was Polk being provocative? Probably so, because they're disagreeing over the border. Is it the Nueces River or is it the Rio Grande? Americans said the Rio Grande, Mexico said the Nueces River. So again, he wins the 1844 election. He's a Democrat, right? Um, basically, before he takes office, Congress had passed a joint resolution annexing Texas, and President Tyler had broke that. Excuse me, had signed that resolution. And at this point, Mexico breaks ties with the United States, right? He does settle the Oregon dispute without war, right? Then this is what gets the Oregon Territory becomes part of the United States, right? And neither Brits nor the United States wanted war. But again, he favored annexation of half of Mexico, this green area that you've seen on the map. And he sent an envoy to Mexico to offer them $20 million for that territory, plus a settlement of damages, et cetera, and this sort of thing. But no Mexican leader was going to give away half the country and stay in power. And so again, Polk sends basically General Zachary Taylor to the disputed area on the Rio Grande with 3,500 troops. And of course, Mexico responds to this with war, right? Mexico attacked U.S. troops over the Rio Grande issue. Polk calls this an invasion of the United States. Congress declares war, but there are many Northerners in the minority Whigs in particular, who are against the war, right? But again, even Henry David Thoreau writes his famous text on civil disobedience and actually goes to prison because he refuses to pay taxes for the war effort. Um, again, there was an attempt, the Wilmot Proviso in 1846, to block slavery in the new territories. It doesn't pass. And this is when Lincoln, as a young Whig, supports the revolution, against the war. But again, that doesn't pass either. So the California Revolt, again in California, the far west province of Mexico, northern Mexico, there's an uprising. This is a picture of General Vallejo, who was actually a Californio. He was actually a Mexican citizen, and he kind of helped lead this revolt. But there's this growing population of American settlers or Anglo-American settlers in California. And General Jose Castro in 1846 actually threatened to expel them if they hadn't declared their Mexican citizenship. John C. Fremont at Sutter's Fort in Sacramento forms militias to fight Mexico. There's several Anglo-Americans attack Sonoma military outposts, create the Bear Flag. It's called the Bear Flag Revolt. General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, now president, sends a peace proposal to Washington, which is basically rejected. The Anglos see their opportunity basically to take northern Mexico, and they're not about to stop. General Scott landed 10,000 men in Veracruz. Again, on September 14th, they march into Mexico City. They hang the flag from the halls of Montezuma. Santa Anna resigns and flees. About 13,000 Americans were killed in this war. Nicholas Trist is the one who's sent to basically negotiate what becomes the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. He was friends with Winford Scott, who was commander of the armed forces. He did fall out of favor with Polk. Polk recalls Trist, but he refuses to return and hopes that with a good deal, Polk will forgive him. Um, I think he probably was forgiven. He negotiates a settlement February 22nd, 1848. A lot of he does catch heat from a lot of Southerners who wanted all of Mexico, right? They wanted all of it, but he agrees to just take half of Mexico. So it's New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. Gives the Mexican government $15 million. This is approximately 250,000 square miles, right? Again, the Southerners, most of them are pretty happy about that. As I said, there was an all Mexico movement that wanted all of Mexico. And Trist and even President Polk thought that wouldn't be a good idea. They envisioned a future where they'd be constantly fighting insurgencies against Mexican people in order to try to hold on to it. So this is a treaty. This is what the map looks like as a result of the treaty. You have basically you have a coast to coast republic, right? Now, you have California, the Utah Territory, New Mexico Territory, which will later be New Mexico and Arizona, Colorado, and actually Nevada and Utah. Then this is the unorganized. This is part of the Louisiana Purchase Territory, still as is Minnesota, right? In Utah, the Mormons start migrating there in like 1847, seeking kind of religious freedom. Weeks after the signing of the treaty, gold is discovered in California. This sparks a massive rush of Anglo-Americans out to California. So this really grows the population of Anglos in California as a result. But yeah, definitely a coast to coast United States republic, with each state entering the Union, though there's going to be sectional conflict, right? The Wilmot Proviso is reintroduced, but again, it doesn't pass. There's a series of compromises to prevent war. We'll talk about the 1850 compromise as when California becomes a state. The 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act. Again, a lot of these types of things are going to go on. The Gadsden Purchase, right, of 1853 basically enabled this area here, which is purchased from Mexico, right? And that really completes kind of what is now the continental United States. Of course, Alaska, when Hawaii will be added much later. Again, Northerners are rightly suspected that Southerners were going to use this opportunity to expand slavery, and they're going to try to do it every single time a state enters the Union. National debates and controversy over what to do to the land will factor into the coming Civil War. So this is just a close-up of the Gadsden Purchase. This is this area that is now southern Phoenix and southwest New Mexico, which was purchased after the war. And here's another map. And again, this really upsets the balance of the slave and free states. Again, to avert sectional conflict, all these different types of compromises are going to be made that often lead to more conflict. But this is a post-war map. You have the Oregon Treaty of 1846, creates the Oregon Territory, California statehood in 1850. Blue denotes the slave states, and you have, of course, the free states and free territories. Of course, Nebraska, Kansas, Nebraska, Utah, New Mexico territory, again, kind of undecided. So the Compromise of 1850. So this is the result of California statehood, and a compromise is made where generally what happens is the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 is passed. It basically abolishes the slave trade in Washington, D.C., where it had existed. California enters the Union as a free state, and the New Mexico territory is also declared an area where there will not be slavery. However, slave trackers are given greater latitude than ever to pursue enslaved Africans across state lines and punish people who aided them. So now the federal government, even in the North, is getting involved in enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act. So it's again, this is an upgraded form of the Fugitive Slave Act that we saw in 1793. And it also says that northern in the free states that law officers, even state, county, and local officers must aid slave trackers. And a lot of people are going to be very much against this idea. And this is going to enrage militants like John Brown, and it's going to endanger all African Americans, even free ones, because you're going to have to basically, the burden of proof is going to be on the individual to prove that they're not the enslaved person that is being sought out. New Mexico is actually created from from Texas. It's broken off and it becomes again its own territory. So the Fugitive Slave Act, again, go into this in greater detail, gave extraordinary power to slave catchers. They said they could deputize anyone that forced them to help. So even people are standing by. They forced law enforcement to act on behalf of slavers. These are new things. And helping an enslaved person becomes like a federal crime because a much more serious crime. And the onus of proof is on African Americans to prove that they're not enslaved. They're not the enslaved person. So no one was safe. And they encouraged fraud and kidnapping of free people all the time and enraged a lot of northern states who did not want to act as agents for the slave catchers. So this is one of those acts that's going to really, the 1850s is going to be a really tense time. A lot of bloodshed and sectional conflict and political violence will lead up to the Civil War, which we will begin to cover uh, in our next topic, in our next lecture.